I'm not being funny. I mean, no disrespect. But you're a cunt. You're a cunt now. You've always been a cunt. And the only thing that's going to change is you're going to become an even bigger cunt. Now you have some more cunt kids. Leave my kids fucking out of it. What have they done?
All right. We know what it's like having those kinds of kids. I can't even say the word.
Are you trying to demonetize us? Is that what you're trying to do? You're trying to ruin the whole show. What are you doing?
Yeah, right from the beginning.
Hello, welcome to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production all the way to release and reception. This is I believe it's episode 2 of the new cycle, isn't it, Chris?
That's right. We're in the 2000s right now. And I'm excited. We've got a guest, and we're going to look at the films Hot Fuzz and In Bruges, which I think just kind of on accident are both British films, and the only British films of this absurdist action thematic arc that we're looking at through the course of cinematic history. But before we get too further into that, Max Covil, thank you for joining us. Tell people where they can find your stuff, what podcasts you are working on, and then we'll get into the show.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Chris and Dan. And I co-host a show called It's the Pictures Podcast. It's found on Twitter at It's the Pick Pod, and we also have a Letterboxd account. Following that, there's a connected Substack that I run and just expand upon things a little bit. You can find some of my freelance work at sites such as Paste Magazine, RogerEbert.com, Polygon. I have a freelance stuff that shows up there sometimes. So, check it out.
Thank you so much. Happy to have you. And you're now our third Rotten Tomatoes approved critic to be on the show. And we're happy to continue the tradition each cycle. And we're excited because not only is your pod awesome, but some of the stuff that you've gotten up on Polygon and RogerEbert.com, I think that this will be a pretty natural fit because even though we're doing comedy for this batch of episodes, or absurdist action, as we call it,
action comedy.
We're probably still going to just be overthinking things nonstop,
as we do. Let's talk about Edgar Wright first. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Let's dive into that morass now. I guess you would say. I can start. I think Shaun of the Dead was one of my favorite movies when it came out. I'm a huge zombie fan, specifically George Romero. And when I saw that, I was like, well, I'm in love with this guy. And then Hot Fuzz comes out. Absolutely loved it when it came out. Do you guys remember this being a big movie in 2007? Do you guys remember sort of popping off? I don't remember it being massive.
No, but I did see it pretty quickly after it came out. Oh, yeah.
Right? Okay.
But there weren't a lot of people there. It was very much I thought that it was going to be huge because I feel like it was marketed obviously better than Shaun of the Dead. He had a bigger budget. There's probably a wider distribution, but you're right. It was kind of anybody who saw it was yeah, that's hilarious, but it wasn't really huge, right? How about you, Max?
Yeah, for me, it was I actually think I missed it when it came out in theaters, and it wasn't really on my radar, despite having really enjoyed Shaun of the Dead and that combination of Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. And since then, I've seen plenty of Edgar Wright films, but it took me a while to find Hot Fuzz, and when I did, I was glad to have found it.
And it technically was the biggest hit of the Cornetto Trilogy, just box office wise, right?
I think so. Yeah, because it did what, 80 million worldwide back then, which I don't know what that
whereas
is now.
Shaun of the Dead did 30, World's End did 46. So it clearly was the most popular, at least stateside, of the bunch, and yet it felt like, at least until Scott Pilgrim came out, that being an Edgar Wright fan was a little more. It was way less of a thing until not only Scott Pilgrim came out, but I feel like a bunch of people rediscovered Spaced, the TV show.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, certainly that was something I did as well.
Yeah, so I'm curious. The big question, there was a light a very minor amount of Hot Fuzz discourse lately on film Twitter. There was some screenshotted tweet that was about the quote propaganda buzzword. And
are you kidding me?
no, I'm not. I'm not.
I can't stand this world.
So I am curious to look at it from 15 years later now since this film came out. But let's stay in 2007 for a bit. Like, we are looking at absurdity in the action genre, the action comedy subgenre, and yet one of the things I really enjoyed about Hot Fuzz when it came out was its not so subtle commentary about small town life, perfectionism, and like the buddy comedy style of genre. But other than that, it felt like it was pretty innocuous, like politically, right?
Oh yeah. Like there's like everything's political at the end of the day. Like I certainly have that viewpoint and lens. But like, is there anything about Hot Fuzz that has like a pointed ideology to it? No. Like I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. Max, what do you think? Do you see anything political in this movie?
Oh, I mean, yeah, like you said, any like art worth discussing, I guess, that has some kind of political elements to it. But it's funny because as the course of the movie goes on, and certainly I'm sure we'll talk about it more, the lines get blurred on who exactly you can trust as good and evil. And I think ultimately it doesn't necessarily put Simon Pegg's character as this ultimate like super cop type of thing, which is I think would have been the biggest argument.
Right, that he's kind of like lionized. Like, yes, he's got flaws because he's perfectionist, because he snitches on everybody, because he, will impugn you for like the slightest transgression. But
Are you
for the
trying to
most
say
part,
he's a fascist, Chris?
yeah. He's
a textbook fascist.
That's kind of what we've been looking at with this genre.
Yeah.
And I think we will continue to, just as we do with existential thrillers, there's less of that like crisis factor, though we will probably dive back into that when we discuss In Bruges at the end of the show. But in terms of like kind of that entry point to the protagonist and like the duo at the center of this film, like so much of the action comedy subgenre, I mean, yes, it's a joke vehicle, and so many of the jokes just are dead, like hit so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, like, what is it about this character? Like, Edgar Wright even went so far as to call it his most autobiographical film.
Oh, I didn't know that. Huh.
Yeah, because he grew up in a small town, and yet he always felt like he was this kind of a fascist creative. Like
I could see that.
Wanted to,
because Last Night in Soho, I could.
I'm gonna keep kicking the can down the road on that one.
Yeah,
Still haven't seen it.
Well, how about this? Before, I think you're talking about a layer that is even above the base layer.
Sure.
Right. The base layer is what? It's like action movies. Here's the tagline: they're bad boys, they're diehards, they're lethal weapons, they are Hot Fuzz. Right. At the end, the base layer to this movie is action movie parody. Right? Question mark. Max, I'll put that to you.
Go.
Yeah. I mean, certainly they play that up. Certainly, one of the pivotal sequences in the movie to solidify the relationship between Pegg and Frost's character is the bonding over watching movies like Point Break and Bad Boys 2, and even when Pegg comes around in the finale section, it's because he sees those classic cop buddy movies on the shelf and makes the move to come back and save the town, or save his friend, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, at the face of it, right? Like that, the whole movie is about. It's skewer. Is it homage? Is it pastiche going to In Bruges? Is it? I think on that very basic level, the wink wink and the irony to it and the meta art, I guess, to the whole thing is incredibly well done.
Mhm.
Right. I think Edgar Wright is a master at doing that. And it's one of the reasons why I think the movie has stuck around for so long. And I think in the US, it's more of, and we established a little bit more of a cult film, right?
Right.
In England, this is like a household movie.
Really?
Like, yeah. So I didn't realize that. And so I was just doing like a gradual, I always search on Reddit just to see what's going on out there. In Bruges is on Reddit like every week is like, oh, it's an underappreciated movie, blah, blah. But Hot Fuzz is in all of these UK forums where it's like, oh man, Hot Fuzz was on ITV, whatever the hell it is, over there. And like, I have to watch it. It's like a requirement, which I didn't really sort of realize that it had that sort of, I don't know, just cultural cachet over there. It's just like they love it. There's something like they love making fun of themselves or something. But I think, on that very basic level, the film is probably the best parody of action films ever made. Maybe. Whoa. I mean, it's pretty high up there.
Yeah,
I couldn't really think of like here's something we should distinguish as because we're doing absurdist action movies. What's the distinction between this and Hot Shots? And Hot Shots Part 2.
Or like any of the, Jerry Zucker films, right?
Scary
Top Secret comes to mind. Yeah. So like there is this like almost the thing that stuck with me a lot in my rewatch is that even though these characters definitely are to be mocked, they are also like fully fleshed out and like likable, just like as actual like three-dimensional human beings. Whereas like, MacGruber or Airplane, like those movies, the purpose of the word parody is to like have those caricatures as like two-dimensional cutouts, right? And they literally are just joke vehicles. And there's this great interview with Nick Frost and Simon Pegg, who, I mean, you can't imagine any other duo being at the center of the Cornetto Trilogy, in particular this one, since it's literally doing the buddy cop thing. And that relationship there, like they said, that's the secret, right? Is that you have to, not only do you have to have good chemistry as actors, but like secretly be in love with each other. Peg said that in Empire for a 15th anniversary piece that's worth looking up. And you have this kind of warmth to it, even though it's very like almost clinical in its precision and like its kineticism as a film, and yet like you really do want to spend time, like even the minor characters, like I was so blown away by like Olivia Colman showing up, and I'm like, oh yeah, she's here and she's killing it.
It's funny too though, because like the cast is stacked. Like when you certainly as I've revisited now, and it's just like there's a great gag at the beginning of the movie where they're going like through the police chiefs and like through the layers, and you're like, oh, this is one famous British guy after the other. Like, who else are they gonna be able to get? And you're like, oh wow, they got this guy.
Yeah, I mean that's the one thing about this film. It like every scene sort of sings because the surrounding cast, no matter what character it is. And I don't know how they did that or how that works. Is that casting? Is that the editor? Is that the director? Or is it just the actor themselves being so great? But everything just clicks in this movie. And Edgar Wright is one of those directors where he is so maniacal and specific that when it clicks and it clicks well, it's just I don't know. It's like, I'm going to say pure cinema. Can I say that? Is that allowed? But I mean, joking aside, it's the craftsmanship here is so, it's just like a watch. It is so precise and perfect that, the question that comes to mind when I watch this, I think a lot of the reviewers sort of pointed this out, is that it's not only a great comment on action movies, but it's also a great action movie at the same time, which reminds me a lot of Scream, a great slasher movie, but also a great commentary on slasher movies. But I guess the big question I have here, and maybe it's an obvious question, but I want to ask it anyways, does Edgar Wright actually love Point Break, Bad Boys 2, Die Hard, Terminator, all that kind of stuff? Is this a love letter? kind of a throwback to the Cabin in the Woods episodes we did about Josh Whedon, saying his movie's a love letter to horror movies, but didn't feel like it.
Right.
I don't know. What do you guys think about this? Is this a love letter to action movies?
You go first, Max, because I got to chew on that. It feels like you could make an argument both sids.
Yeah, for me, I think the Edgar Wright's purpose for all three of the movies in the Cornetto Trilogy was to kind of make these comedies out of maybe like genres that weren't. I mean, yeah, there's funny buddy cop movies, but to really make fun. I mean, certainly Shaun of the Dead was like this hilarious zombie movie, but at the same time, it was a really great zombie movie. I think that he obviously had a great joy for the material, and throughout his career, he seems to have explored a lot of different genres. I mean, like we have already alluded to, like Last Night in Soho, he wanted to like look at those maybe like Italian horror movies, and that's where he drew his inspiration for that. So, yeah, I think it comes from like a place of love as opposed to just like making fun of the material and not enjoying it.
This reminds me of, I think maybe it was about the mid 2000s when I feel like there was a maybe not a film Twitter discourse, but like a just general pop culture kind of tension about the term guilty pleasure, right? Where people are starting to reevaluate that term, where and I think I myself have gone through various cycles of like when I watch Point Break or the Bad Boys movies, delineating when I'm just like having fun and like just pure pleasure, pure cinema, if you will, versus like an actual, like I'm laughing at how ridiculous the set pieces are or how frantic Michael Bay's editor is cutting between shots, right?
Yeah.
So like at the end of the day, it does feel like he did Edgar Wright did a interview with Filmmaker magazine in advance of the movie coming out, and he talked about how it was a on-set interview where basically they collected as many of these, not just like contemporary action movies like 80s and 90s, but even going back further into like the 60s and 70s of just like having like just sharing tapes amongst the cast, like, oh, you got to watch this tonight, you got to watch this tonight, or they'd watch them on set after wrapping for the day. And so like there is that like just pure enjoyment factor to it, whereas like like the Scary Movie or the Zucker movies, it feels like there's definitely some really pointed derision, even though they're just like so dumb, like they're arguably dumber than the movies they're making fun of, right?
Yeah, there's condescension there in a Scary Movie or anything like that. Like we're above it all, we're smarter than this. The people who like this are idiots. Middle America hate, it's like it's definitely sort of an elitist viewpoint. I did find some quotes here. I didn't set you guys up, but I kind of did because Simon Pegg said, Hot Fuzz slightly satirizes itself by drawing attention to some of the more extreme cliches and devices used in those movies, being action movies. It was made with affection as a Valentine to those movies. It is not a critique. But then, and I love using primary documents because he goes on to contradict himself later on in the same interview. He's talking about Bad Boys 2 and Point Break. He says they're supremely entertaining and completely unpretentious. They are proud to be big and dumb. That is why we picked those two. Bad Boys 2 is an absurd display of machismo and fireworks, but that is not to say there's anything wrong with that. Artistically, you cannot defend Bad Boys 2 like you cannot defend fireworks going off. How do we even unpack that minefield? Like, is it? I think the point that pops into my head here is that like there's clearly a love for action movies here. You do not make something like this unless you love Predator or Point Break or any of those movies. Like you have to love them and have consumed them pretty religiously over your teenage years and young adult years, right?
Yeah.
But there is a layer here of, I don't know if I'd call it condescension, but there's ironic distance at the very least.
Yeah.
where he's not making a Michael Bay movie, right? Like kind of like you said. So it's not homage, and it's not necessarily, I wouldn't call it a Valentine. Maybe it's a Valentine with like, a broken heart on it or something. I don't know. What do you guys, I mean, you see where I'm going here? There's something, it's a weird mixture of love and sort of maybe some condescension. I don't know.
It's almost like it's a galaxy brain level kind of hypocrisy going on, where like you have to be able to sit with both of those viewpoints, right? Like, yes, it is contradictory, but at the same time, like, it made me think of Nick Frost's character, who for the first like half of the film is just depicted as an oaf, right?
Mhm.
Like a dumb guy that just got a job because of who his daddy is, and has is constantly like brings baked goods into the department, gets put in the drunk tank and then puts on his uniform in the morning, and that's very much like making fun of a particular type of person. And then he brings out those two DVDs, but that's also like the moment where he becomes a fully fleshed out, like, empathetic person too. So that when that reveal happens later in the film about, is he going to side with his dad or with Simon Pegg? And he ultimately makes the quote right choice.
Mhm.
And so, it feels like it's meant to like force you to sit there with those two opposing forces and say like, okay, yeah, I guess it's possible to both like be an uneducated nepotism hire and still be like a person that can do good things and can have fun watching action movies with his new best friend. So
Interesting. It's an interesting read you have there. I feel like you are sensing you have a critique of this film that I want to dive into more. Like I really want to unpack, I feel like there's some other layer, because all I see here is just a really funny parody of an action movie that's a great action movie. I'm not seeing much more happening beyond that, and that's a little bit problematic on some level to me, because it's like, and this is going to be a very IMO situation right now, like, it's a great movie, I love it, but it's never going to be Die Hard, right? It's never going to reach that level to me where it's like, oh, this is, a non-ironic sort of straightforward action movie or adventure film. It's always going to have that ironic distance to it.
But is that, you think, because of the comedy nature of it that helps separate it? Because you mentioned Die Hard, and certainly that's like in the upper echelon of action films, and you could have a handful of movies that you feel that way about, and they're just like untouchable. But I guess going back to the quote that you used by Simon Pegg, he envisioned this movie to be like, they want it to be sort of like Bad Boys 2, but then they like don't want to envision the movie or place its legacy at that level. Like they aspired it to like be a little higher brow than that.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately where they want it to sit. And I don't know. I mean, like, as far as like these buddy cop like action movie type things, I think that I enjoy some of the brevity that this movie provides, as opposed to like some of the really heavy-handed buddy cop movies.
Yeah, I think that, I keep going back to the relationships of the characters, and I think there's Edgar Wright has basically developed a shorthand, right, for that kind of I think there's definitely homage going on here. I think you look at the rest of his filmography, Scott Pilgrim in particular is like just chock full of homage to other media that clearly has inspired him, including like the manga upon which it's based. And yet there's this I do also kind of agree with you, Dan, with this detachment factor where it's like he is so good at his this is what it comes down to. You were asking about like trying to dig into what is my critique that I keep like dancing around.
I sense something.
Edgar Wright's kind of annoying, right?
There it is.
But he knows he's annoying, and he
that's
uses.
funny. I was going to ask a question about this. I was going to ask. I think we've all seen Last Night in Soho, right?
No.
Yes.
Oh, you haven't. Okay.
No.
Okay. So let's go back. Baby Driver. Have we seen this?
Yes.
Baby Driver. Okay. So it's like, are there elements that you notice in Hot Fuzz that come out later in his career that did not age so well?
Right.
There's in the production of this film, like his sort of the really quick editing and stuff like that, the top down stuff. Love it. It's great. It's a great little touch that he has to his films. But there are elements here. It's a little overly long. It's not a super tight story. And this, I think that gets a little bit worse with World's End, where it's like, oh, this is messy. This feels messy.
Yeah.
And like, there's like little things, little cracks in this movie that I would not have noticed unless I saw Baby Driver and Last Night in Soho. And so like, maybe, there's, like you're saying, he is kind of annoying. He is kind of a know-it-all. And when you see Last Night in Soho, you can't unsee that. Right. Like the cracks just completely rip wide open in that movie. It was so bad that I basically, if I was in the theater, I would have walked out. Like, that's how bad that I thought that movie was. And this is a guy that I love. Like, and I love his movies. I love Scott Pilgrim, which actually I'd never seen until Chris forced me to watch it like 5 years ago. Is one of my favorite movies of all time. Like, I think it's a masterpiece. But it's
really obnoxious. It's an obnoxious masterpiece.
Yeah, it's super obnoxious. I mean, what's obnoxious about this movie, though, specifically? Like, what are you seeing that...
The thing that really stood out with this rewatch, and I think it's just... This is the first time, like, probably since the theater, watching it, like, I'm in my mid-30s. I can afford a good surround system now. And so, like, those edits do get laborious, like the sound effects with like the foom, ching, foom. Like, it's just it's a lot, and it very much like has this kind of like brash, kind of immature style to it that kind of comes out full force in both Scott Pilgrim and Baby Driver. Scott Pilgrim, it makes sense because it's literally about like
turning the pages,
young adults, like a comic book video game come alive. With Baby Driver, like. And that's the thing, is like, he's self-aware of it. He's like, this is literally a screenplay I wrote when I was like 17. And I finally get to like have millions of dollars to make it. So it's like literally like his teenage boy id coming to life in like this really like entertaining, but really ugly way.
It's bizarre. It's a bizarre movie.
I'm curious, Max, what's your sell on Last Night in Soho? Because so far I am not going to fire up my HBO Max anytime soon.
Yeah, don't watch that movie.
Did you not like it either?
No, I hated it.
God, what is it about that? I could talk about that movie for hours. Screw Hot Fuzz. Let's talk about how terrible Last Night in Soho is.
No, I was because I heard like people disliking and stuff like that. It's like, how bad could it be? I gotta watch this, and I was like, oh no.
Yeah, do you see any connection to what he did in Hot Fuzz to that movie? You see any bridge?
I don't know. Like, I guess like some of his he certainly has a lot of love for these stories of unbelievable like lead characters like trying to purvey like their problems. Certainly that's thinking that links Hot Fuzz and Last Night in Soho directly, right? Because Thomasin McKenzie's character and Last Night in Soho is like saying, oh, I'm seeing ghosts and I'm being haunted and no one believes me, and she's trying to get people to help her. Whereas here in Hot Fuzz, Simon Pegg's character is like, you guys need to believe me. These are murders, and everybody's just like, no, they're accidents. Murders don't happen here. And I mean, for me, that was really obnoxious. I mean, it's like a joke that goes too long. Because at first you're like, yeah, I get it. They want to like sort of diminish his ability, or they want to say he overworks and he's just kind of like crazy. But then you're like, yeah, this is really just keeps on nailing the point across, and it's like you gotta let the joke go.
He does sort of bludgeon the audience a little bit, right?
And there is that. I mean, it's interesting you bring up. Because I guess I didn't realize how much of a horror riff Last Night in Soho is, and I very much during my rewatch of Hot Fuzz was like, it feels very strange that it's like this mini slasher movie inside of the buddy cop action movie, right? Where it's like it's absurdist action, but it's also like absurdist horror kills of the costumed mysterious character that is killing off these people,
right? Who's like almost like ghost faced himself,
right?
like,
Yeah,
100%. Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on with this movie that, like, as a movie aficionado, a nerd, you're gonna like it, right? Like,
yeah.
there is someone brought this up in terms of like how much Edgar Wright references other movies. Apparently, there's like a track on the Space DVD that's like a reference subtitle thing, and it tells you what they're referencing in every scene.
Oh God!
And it's like apparently it's like nonstop, like the entire show, right?
That's like Ready Player One syndrome, right?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, look at this, right? Look at that. I remember that. So yeah, I mean, yeah, that's definitely, he has a style. I mean, you said at the very least, he has a very distinct style. Some of it's a little bit irritating. I mean, one thing that kind of came to mind with this movie in rewatching it, and I've probably seen this movie 20 times since it came out. Like, it's a good movie, right? And it has a high rewatchability to it. As an action movie, I think it definitely works. But like I said, it doesn't really feel like a Die Hard level or anything like that. As a comedy, I think it obviously works a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder, like, back to like the initial question that I think that Chris was asking us, like, is there a point to this movie? Like,
yeah.
Is there what is the message, if there is one? Or is it just because it seems deeper than just, hey, let's laugh at funny kind of doofuses and country people? What is like maybe the not so latent ideology here, or sort of point that's going on? What do you guys think? Or message?
The absurdity of it is, and this is kind of where I feel like there's three Americans talking about this, right?
British movie,
there's very much like a cultural aspect to this that I feel like I'm missing, that I'm only like getting through glimpses of pop culture. I mean, Edgar Wright went so far as to say, like, when Shaun of the Dead became a cult hit, he got offers to turn it into an American TV show, or sell the rights so that they could remake it in America. And he was trying to explain that, like, his movies, even though they are definitely crossover hits, have like this certain like the point of Hot Fuzz. One of the key reasons it works as a comedy is because British cops are not seen in the same way as American cops, right? And that kind of also goes full circle to when I was talking about like looking at this in 2022 versus 2007. There has been so much baggage about the American police and just like how insidious, corrupt, and murderous they've become, and maybe always have been. That is a little. It doesn't vibe with Hot Fuzz, specifically because like literally British cops don't carry guns, right? They are literally seen as like kind of just like oafish clowns that are largely ineffectual at best, and unintelligent at worst.
Jason
and he kind of
Swans, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or a swan, sorry, a swan.
Yeah, just a single swan causing all that drama. And so I feel like if there is some kind of message, it very much is about, like I was saying earlier, that autobiographical aspect, the perfectionism, and the, a small town can be more than meets the eye, which isn't, these are not very mind-blowing messages. And yet, because it's peppered and just like blast, like so jam-packed with just really solid jokes and really solid performances, then it it just comes across as this weird combination of parody and genuine. And I really think that it's one of those films where like you try to mix it with the explosive buzzword like propaganda, and it just doesn't work simply because of who we're talking about and what we're talking about.
I mean, it's hard too because he, Edgar Wright's British. What does he know about American police? Right? Like
he knows it through Point Break and Bad Boys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like a commentary on a fictionalization of American police in the British culture. The layers are just, it's very filling, but it's hard to digest, right? At the same time, like I don't think there's a lot. I don't think there's any intellectual thesis going on behind a lot of what he's doing. I think it's played for laughs and enjoyment, and it's so cinematic and enjoyable. It's a popcorn movie at the end of the day, but that doesn't mean there isn't an ideology behind it, right? Probably a hidden one. But I think it's way on the lighter side of things. Let's talk about the darker side of things with In Bruges, a 2008 movie, which. Oh, how did I come about this one? I think through film festivals.
Really?
I was really into sort of, figuring out what's going on in the world in film. And I think I came across it back then. I definitely did not see this in the theater when it came out. I think I saw it on DVD. What about you guys? Did you guys see this back in 2008, like right away or kind of later on?
Max, you go first.
Yeah, for me, I don't remember if I necessarily saw it in 2008, but it's funny. Before I discussed this episode with you guys, and you gave me a few different ones to look at. I picked this one in particular because I remember that I was fond of both movies, Hot Fuzz and In Bruges, and so I was like, oh well, I'll rewatch some movies I enjoyed. And I tell you, when I turned on In Bruges, I was like, I've forgotten like how mean Martin McDonagh's scripts can be. I'm like, these guys are like real bastards, right?
Yeah, that's pretty brutal.
I'm like, why did I like this movie? And it eventually it made sense to me why I enjoyed it. But it takes a little while to get there.
It's definitely sour, right? Compared to Hot Fuzz.
Oh yeah.
Just a little more saccharine. I don't know, Chris, how'd you come about this movie?
I asked you to first, Max, because I had to Google it first to figure out when Netflix started its streaming platform. Yeah. The transition from the DVD mail service, right. Because I have a vivid memory of this being one of the first movies I watched on Netflix streaming, and also have this really good memory of not only being like, oh my gosh, I can just stream a title from my couch, but also really just being enamored specifically with both the script and the two lead performances. And I had a similar reaction to you upon my rewatch, Max. I even had such fond memory of this movie that since it wasn't on streaming free anywhere right now, I sprung for the Blu-ray, and I was like, oh my gosh, did I just waste $20?
You guys are so brutal. Come on.
And then oh my god, that last half hour is just magical. Just how it's I was just it's when I fully remembered why I love this movie so much. But it really does challenge you, doesn't it? It really just pokes and prods you. And maybe I'm stereotyping because once again, this is three American guys, but I think Martin McDonagh himself has said several times, he's not just a British screenwriter and playwright and director, he's Irish.
Yes, it's a very Irish movie,
right?
The two leads are Irish: Colin Farrell, Brendan Gleeson. Ralph Fiennes is their British boss, which has a whole nother layer to it. I mean, to me, the darkness and the humor and the language and the viewpoints read to me as very Irish, in the sense that it's just this darkness. And that's, Irish humor is known for that. There's a sort of real strong undercurrent of bleakness to what they're sort of laughing at. But God, what a tonal difference from Hot Fuzz. This, what are the crossovers though? It's is it absurdist? Yeah, totally absurdist. Why does it feel absurd though? Why does this movie feel
Because
absurd?
it is very much more in a grounded, realistic world than Hot Fuzz, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is, but it
and
also... I don't know. Go ahead, Max.
Yeah, and despite being like very harsh and using extremely colorful language, it is very funny too. In a different way than Hot Fuzz is.
It's not ha-ha funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely you laugh differently. Like when you laugh in Hot Fuzz, you feel good afterwards. When you laugh in Bruges, you feel kind of sick. You know? You're like, why did I just laugh at that? That's not actually that funny. It's kind of mean and disturbed.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's some absurdity elements to it. It feels, and maybe this is definitely my viewpoint, it feels like a post Reservoir Dogs film. Remember when there was that in Pulp Fiction where it was this huge influx of Tarantino scripts about criminals and hitmen and stuff like that? It kind of feels like a descendant of that world. I mean, what does he know about hitmen? He doesn't know anything about hitmen. He doesn't know anything about crime. Like, clearly he does not. And they even kind of mention this in the film about it's a fairy tale town, even though it's not. And sort of there's that weird, there is almost a magical realism, like a very faintness to this movie that I think feels a little absurdist. That kind of elevates the story a lot.
The whole the scene that really fits that description is, in my mind, one is just like the funniest kind of like variations on the old Three Stooges, Who's on First, where they're like talking about how they're going to exit the hotel to continue their shootout, so that they don't hurt the hotel owner. And it's just like, and part of it is absolutely the performances, part of it's the script, but I'm going to do this because you went so far as to use the phrase pure cinema when talking about the previous film, but now I'm going to be guilty of something ridiculous. It's because, wouldn't you say that like the city's kind of a character too?
Oh, come on. You're killing me here.
No, I agree that Bruges itself is pivotal to this. Ray Fiennes' character says as much. He's like, "Oh, I was hoping to give the boy like a magical place," and Colin Firth's character is like, he can't be real, right? He's like, this place sucks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's that weird juxtaposition about there's like the baseness of the comedy and the story. I mean, he's there because he accidentally killed a kid. Can I just comment? This is how I know that they know nothing about crime. Like, no one kills someone that way. Like, why would you like shoot someone like 12 times like that and like a different angle? Like, that makes no sense. Sorry, that's not how people kill people.
And then it happens again at the end of the movie.
Right.
Yeah, you're like, what? And also the bullet hole in the kid's head is in the wrong angle, but that's a whole other thing.
Forensics expert over here.
I mean, it makes no sense. But it's like he's creating. This popped into my head in the shower the other day. And feel free to shoot this down if you guys want to shoot this down. But I feel like action movies are like male fairy tales. Does this make sense? Am I onto something here?
Keep going. Keep going.
It's like it's like this dream world where you get to be a cop, you get to be a robber, but you're playing out sort of the mundaneness of everyday life and the challenges that you have in everyday life. And in this movie, it's sort of like, what is that challenge? And I think it's something to do with sort of, being true to yourself and your principles or something. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is there something there? It's like a fairy tale with a moral. This one has a moral to it, this story. The moral's not a good one, right? I think the moral is so specifically stated that, like, I mean, like, when you think about, there's two moments that really come to mind. One, the entire plot revolves around a principle. That if you kill a kid, you have to die, which is okay. Like, innocence is the most important thing in the world. I don't know. It's a crazy sort of thing. But I actually find there's another moment in the movie that seemed more pointed in sort of its messaging, is that Ken decides to let Ray free, right? Like, and he has a principle of, I need to let him go. right? So I think there's there's something there where it's like holding, being true to your principles or something like that.
Well,
It
the
has a
link,
message, right?
yeah, and I think the link between those two threads is the idea of innocence and the capacity for change, right? Why is it
Yes,
so
yeah.
morally brutal, incorrect to kill a kid? Because they could have had a life, right? They could have grown to be somebody, and Brendan Gleeson's character Ken could really see a capacity for change in Colin Farrell. There's a great podcast called oh god, what was I listening to the other day? Cinema of Meaning, and they talk about all the clues along the way, both in the script and in Colin Farrell's performance, where essentially, right, and it's not necessarily a new thing. Like it happened a lot, I think, especially in the late 2000s with Knocked Up and Apatow Universe. That man-child, like he's literally like, kicking things in the church because he doesn't want to be there. He's like making fun of, he has these prejudices that then he starts like learning a little bit more about and pulling back on in very immature and crude ways, but still like he's learning. Like he has only done one job as a hitman. He's very early in his professional life. It's an absurd professional life. But he very much is essentially a child, and Brendan Gleeson can see that Ralph Fiennes cannot. And so there's these two principles that contradict each other, and then you end up with the culminating scene, which, like I said, is just really powerful as it is like funny and ironic, just like the ironic reveal at the end of Hot Fuzz, but without, like, it's funny because like the relationships in Hot Fuzz was what feels like meat on the bones in that movie, but like the plotting and the moralisms of In Bruges is what feels powerful here. Though you could definitely make an argument that like the chemistry between Gleeson and Farrell is fantastic, and yet there is this. Yeah, I think you're right, Dan. That like you're acting out, this fairy tale. It's just that in Edgar Wright's film, you get the happy ending, and in this one, you don't.
Well, it's
that's I think if you're gonna bring up the ending here is left vague, right? I mean, on the happy side, you could imagine that Colin Farrell's character has finally gotten the will to live, because he had lost that in the film, and was ready to give up, and since he fought so hard to save his own life and to survive there at the end, that maybe hopefully he survived his ordeal.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, I read the ending is a little bit more optimistic. I mean, here's the thing: even if he dies, right, he found the will to live, right? Even though he had done this terrible thing earlier, that was a completely on accident. Even though he was doing it sort of in a very evil act, it was an accident. Yeah, it's I think it's obviously a way more complicated film than Hot Fuzz. Hot Fuzz sort of skims along the surface about societal stuff and social stuff, and this film does not. I mean, especially being raised Catholic, there's just like
guilt, right?
Yeah, like an endless minefield of purgatory and all that sort of stuff, and the worship of innocence is very common in that religion as well. And and sort of being a bad person and being a sinner, and you deserve the pain that you have, all that sort of stuff was very out in front in this movie. And I think that's, on the rewatch, something that I latched onto a little bit more. I think when I first saw it, it did feel like a Tarantino kind of knockoff that was really funny. And Colin Farrell, I think, is it's not a breakout performance for him, but it's definitely a kind of a different direction that he went in from this movie forward. Because I think before this, as I remember, he was kind of like more of a heartthrob, right?
Like, phone booth,
SWAT, stuff like that. And this is kind of his turn into, I guess I'll call it more serious sort of film work that I think he's been pretty amazing over the last few years doing. But yeah, I think there's a lot in this movie, and I think, Chris, you hit the nail on the head when you said that like it is the plotting and the really, really tight script that holds this thing together, and why it has such a strong skeleton to it, and why it moves so well as a film. but there's so many accents here, and there's so much like foliage that like really fills out the film, where it does feel like I did not have the reaction you guys had, because I remember seeing it. I had a like opposite reaction when I first saw it. I was like, oh wow, this is really unsettling. Like the humor is very dark, and there's the really the grotesque scene when, spoiler alert, one of the main characters dies through a very long fall and is basically dismembered on the ground there. Disgusting. Or even the kid getting shot, the
violence is arguably more extreme than Hot Fuzz.
Well, I mean, funny when you guys mentioned these two together in Absurdist Action. That's why I thought you measured these up together, because of how violent I thought the kills were in both movies.
Certainly, like super over the top, right? And the gore, the gore in Bruges feels without a doubt absurd, and just but kind of mixes with the comedy tone really well. It's not like cartoonish gore; it's really gore, like Tom Savini gore.
Yeah, and the camera work is still very tasteful, because like Brendan Gleeson's performance in his dying moment. Spoiler alert! I know you usually say that before the actor's name, but like with there's like the soft focus over like his guts hanging out and the leg in the distance, but then the camera like stays tight on his face. And so like there's just like this sense of seriousness to it. It's just amazing. I don't know how McDonagh does it. He definitely does it better here than he did in either Seven Psychopaths or Ebbing, Missouri. But we won't touch that minefield. But it's really like impressive that he does that, all wrapped up in, like you said, on the surface, you very much could just view this film as one of those, like a latent Tarantino thing, right? And it's like how it's one of those it's one of those movies that should not work, and yet it works in spades.
Yeah, it's his debut movie too,
right?
But you can tell that he was a playwright. Obviously comes from the theater world where it's like the writing is just like off the charts. Did you guys still find it funny, like the dark humor in this?
Yeah, I do, absolutely.
Yeah,
I did notice that, like I said before, like I was definitely laughing again watching Hot Fuzz for probably the 6th or 7th time. But watching In Bruges, it was definitely just like, it was more internal. Like I had a lot more internal reactions, especially to, a lot of the, the racist, ableist stuff that's happening, which
I think
could definitely...
That is the stuff that kind of like irked me the most, is the ableist stuff of one of the characters in the movie. But on the other hand, I thought it was hilarious with like I guess Colin Farrell's character is interested in a young actress, and like he goes up to her place, and the boyfriend comes into the house, and he's like having a gun and everything, and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna get you," and then he like. Colin Farrell just easily takes the gun and shoots a blank in his eye. It's just it's like absolutely ridiculous, and like it's like some of that crude like just I don't know how to put it, like ridiculous humor.
Yeah, it's almost there's not a lot of love there in the humor, right? It's almost like there's like an antisocial element to it, especially from Ray. I mean, the thing that sticks out to me is a lot of the language and the perspectives here, despite being presented in a way that's you're supposed to make sort of laugh at and not laugh with. It is kind of tough to sit there and kind of listen to it and sort of be like, oh, I guess I'm okay going along with this. Because you want to, I think, obviously Ray and Ken are the protagonists here, and Ray probably more the main protagonist. You want to feel sympathy for him. You want to, you want him to get through it, but he's not a good person.
Right.
And nor is Ken. And Harry is certainly not a good person. And, it's one of those sort of, I guess it's the anti-hero thing of the 2000s, the Breaking Bad type stuff and Sopranos and all that. Or like The Shield would be a really good example. But like, do you guys care about Ray in this movie at all? Do you want him to survive? I kind of did. I was indifferent to him.
I felt very much like I was constantly reminded in every scene how, like, if I didn't have, like, Colin Farrell's bushy eyebrows and puppy dog eyes in every shot, I would, like, can you imagine? I don't know if another British actor, like, I don't know if I would have cared about him if it was Daniel Craig or anybody. Like, this is just it's one of those roles. Like, every facial expression he makes is, like, so, like, clearly tailored, and he's one of those actors that, like you said earlier, I just, like, didn't care about at all. Like, he just felt like, oh, he's just another British guy that crossed over the pond and now is, a generic action stand-in. But, like, I don't know how is it possible that he makes me care about him, because I do. Maybe it is that childless aspect to it. What do you think, Max?
Yeah, I think, like, when I was watching it this time, I had forgotten, like, the main story beats of it, and I'm just like, his character Ray gets on the train, and I'm like, there's no way he's out of this movie with 30 minutes left. It's like, we know that, like, Ray finds his characters coming into town, and I'm just like, yeah, there's gonna be some way to bring him back there, and I'm just like, the moves that he makes once he's, like, back in town are, like, really, really stupid even for him. And I'm just like, it puts him in a really outrageously bad situation. But one of the scenes I love, and you use the dialogue from it to begin the episode, is the sit down between Harry and Ken.
Such a good exchange.
Yeah, and I love that in movies. I since I was just talking with my It's the Pitches co-host about Heat, and, like, how Pacino and De Niro sit down at the table, and, like, these guys want to get each other, right? But they can have, like, this cordial meeting because, like, they're in a situation where they just can't take each other out. But I love that when movies employ that.
It's like they did something similar at the top of the tower.
Right.
Which essentially Ken expresses his sort of love and respect to Harry, knowing that he's about to get killed by him. Like, there's, like, that's such a masculine thing. I love you because I know you're going to kill me now.
Right.
I mean, that you bring up a good point too, Max. I think, like, the thing about both of these movies, as much as, like, these are action movies and it's about guns going off and explosions and people getting shot and all that kind of stuff, my favorite scenes in both these movies are just people talking to each other.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, even, like, especially the early part of Hot Fuzz, got every interaction when he goes to sort of get the tour of the police station. And they go, oh, it's 11:30 your first day, time for lunch. And they go to the pub, and it's just like, oh, those back and forth, like, everybody's packing out here or whatever it is. I don't know, there's something about those ping pong scenes. I don't know if should I call it Sorkin-esque? I shouldn't.
How dare you?
But yeah, it's those talkie scenes. Boom, boom,
Right.
like, back and forth conversations that are super funny.
Well,
I was gonna.
You said Tarantino earlier. That's what he's known for.
Yeah, you're right. Good call out.
And I was gonna say this earlier too, of this like, hangout quality, like,
Yes.
like a hangout sitcom almost, but, like, with this, like, very kinetic energy that helps propel it forward, so that it never feels like a hangout movie, right, or a hangout story. And I think, In Bruges does the same thing, where it's like, and I felt it, like, both movies, actually, probably, like, the first half of both movies, I'm like, wait a second, are these action movies? And of course, it's proven that they are with the second halves, but, like, they just, like, so much good setup. I mean, you talked about it being masculine. I think the one thing that's annoying in both movies, and I think especially in Bruges, there was a whole female character cut out of Hot Fuzz, by the way, a whole romantic interest of Simon Pegg's character. That it was just, I mean, the movie was already over 2 hours, so they cut all of her scenes. But also the romantic interest here in Bruges is, like, it's very much of that whole era, right? Of the manic pixie dream girl,
it's
like
fantasy. It's all fantasy.
And that's, you can definitely make an argument that that's part of the whole male wish fulfillment thing happening here. But it is annoying, especially when we see her, like, as he's getting pulled away on the stretcher at the end, and she's like, "Oh my god!" And she's known this guy a day and a half, and she's a drug addict.
Hey man, it's his dream. He can dream whatever he wants. It's essentially what these movies are, right? Any final thoughts on Hot Fuzz, In Bruges that you guys have? I'll start out. I still love both these movies. I think that like even with age, I think In Bruges is very problematic with the humor, and it's a little bit tough, especially nowadays, to really digest it all. Hot Fuzz to me just still clicks perfectly. And like, yeah, it's too long. Yeah, it's over the top. Yeah, it's kind of annoying. But wow, is it, a hilarious movie that is like easy just to put on and have in the background and just laugh every once in a while. What do you guys think?
I'll let you have the final word, Max. So
Okay.
I'll just briefly recap that, I'm looking at the decade of the 2000s and what was going on there. And I think these two are probably two of the most special of this kind of thing, trying to balance comedy and action and be absurdist, but also like have some warmth to them so that they're not complete, just like cartoons. And like we did an episode a while back on Pineapple Express, and I think there's an argument to be made for that film. There's the great Black Dynamite, which brings in the blaxploitation factor, but otherwise you've got like, I don't know, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Tropic Thunder, Paul Blart Mall Cop 1 and 2. Like there's not a lot in this decade, right, that really kind of still sings today. And like Tropic Thunder has problematic humor, and In Bruges does, and Hot Fuzz, has some factors to it that aren't as interesting as perhaps they were when I was in my mid-20s seeing it for the first time, like thematically and being overly layered or deep. But yeah, they're both bangers. They both like stick the landing, and I'm just like, yeah, this movie rocks. Even though I can, pull myself back and be like, this is not great and this is not great. It's just like, what a time. Look, you said it again, Dan. Pure cinema.
Pure cinema. Max, what are your thoughts, man?
Yeah, I was happy to revisit both of these movies. Certainly from the get go, I remembered feeling pretty strongly about both of them, enjoying them. One thing that we didn't talk about Hot Fuzz in particular is Timothy Dalton's performance.
Yes,
and
amazing.
Other than James Bond, it's like the thing that I most remember Timothy Dalton for, probably. And the way that the script is so clever, it just like centers your eyes on him all the time. But that's obviously where Peg's character is looking, and I like how the film actually opens up from there. As for In Bruges, like I said, I didn't. Like, I remember being really enjoying it, and I think by the time I was done watching it, I was like, oh yeah, now I get it. Now I realized why I enjoyed it, and it was a good time watching both of these films, and I think that ultimately we're going to see Gleason and Farrell again in the new movie of McDonagh's. So obviously the chemistry worked, and maybe lightning will strike twice there. And looking forward to that. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you coming on the show. It's been great. Where can people find you, and what do you got coming up on the podcast? Are any new articles coming out?
Yeah, so recently we recorded a episode where our co-host John Gilpatrick and I went through our presumed top 10 sight and sound list, and tried to pick our favorites. It was fun because we didn't know whether or not we should just pick our favorite movies, or if there was some need to pick international films, or one from certain directors, or just like certain ones that hold different prestige. So we had a lot of fun with that. Just today, as we're recording this, I had a new review go up on Paste Magazine of the new Masaka Yuasa, and the movie's called Inuo, and it's this really cool Japanese anime film where it takes place in 14th century Japan, and it's supposed to have like all this like classical dance and music of that era, but the music and dance is more of what you'd expect from like a rock concert of seeing like Freddie Mercury and Queen, and
Nice.
it's really cool. So I going forward, if you want to hear more from me, it's the pictures. It's the Pick Pod on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at mhcovil. You can listen to the podcast, check out the Substack. I write there too, or I've been doing a lot of work for Paste Magazine, so you can find me there too.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much, Max.
I appreciate it.
This has been Film Trace. Boom.